The Empire detected a single human vessel too late. By then, it was already inside their lines. The Keth Empire sensor grid at the Ardennes threshold was considered, by every credible military analysis in the known galaxy, to be impenetrable. Not a boast. A technical specification. 47 relay stations arranged in overlapping arcs, each one capable of detecting the thermal bloom of a single oxygen atom ionized at half a light second. 3 layers of passive gravitational lensing arrays that could register the displacement of a vessel as small as a courier drone. 23 patrol wings cycling through 7-hour rotational sweeps, with gap windows measured in milliseconds. Not seconds, not minutes, milliseconds, because Keth engineers did not design systems with human margin for error. They designed systems the way nature designs bone. Dense at the load points, efficient at the margins, and completely uninterested in anything that couldn't fight back. Fleet Commander Sesaroth had reviewed the grid specifications 17 times during his command tenure at Ardennes. He reviewed them the way other officers reviewed prayer, not because he doubted but because certainty, properly maintained, required ritual. He was reviewing them for the 18th time when his primary sensor operator, Subcommander Vinthal, spoke from across the operations deck. "Commander, I have a contact anomaly." Sesaroth did not look up immediately. Anomalies were common. Space was full of them. Thermal echoes from stellar activity, phantom returns from micrometeorite clusters, the occasional background artifact that the grid's own emission signature introduced. Vinthal had been with him for 6 years and knew the difference between a ghost and a contact. The fact that he'd called it an anomaly and not a contact was meaningful. Classification. "That's the problem, sir. I can't classify it." Sesaroth set down his data slate. In 6 years, Vinthal had never said those words. He crossed the deck in 12 steps and stood behind his sensor operator station, looking at the display. What he saw was not a blip. It was not a bloom. It was the absence of a return where a return should have been, a cold spot in the thermal carpet of background radiation, moving at a very specific velocity, on a very specific heading. "How long has that been there?" Sesaroth asked. Vinthal's mandibles shifted in the Keth equivalent of a grimace. "I've been backtracking through the archive. Best estimate is 41 hours. 41 hours. The object, whatever it was, had been inside the threshold's outer sensor envelope for 41 hours before his operator noticed the shape of nothing moving against the backdrop of something. Where is it now? Vinthal zoomed the display. The cold spot was 11 light minutes inside the inner grid. Past the patrol lanes. Past the relay stations. Past everything. It's heading for Ardennes Station, Vinthal said quietly. At current velocity, intercept in approximately 6 hours. Sesaroth stared at the display for a long moment. Then he did something he had never done in 18 years of command. He activated the priority red communication channel without completing a threat assessment first. Because the threat assessment was complete. Something was inside his lines. Something he could not see properly, could not classify, and could not stop in time to prevent it from reaching his station. He needed to know what it was. He was about to learn something that would change his understanding of the species called humans, not because of what the vessel could do, but because of what it was designed to survive. 41 hours earlier, in the cold dark 11 light minutes outside Ardennes Station, Commander Yael Dehan had been eating a protein bar and watching the Keth patrol rotation cycle through its 7th pass since she'd slipped inside the outer envelope. The Lazarus was not a warship. It never had been. The hull classification in the United Earth Fleet Registry read ARSC. Autonomous Reconnaissance and Signals Collection. A spook boat. A ghost. 104 meters of sensor baffling emission suppression, and very uncomfortable living arrangements for a crew of 11, built around a single operational philosophy that Yael had internalized so thoroughly it had become reflex. You are not there. Not stealthy. Not cloaked. Those were engineering terms for systems that actively hid a vessel's presence. The Lazarus didn't hide. It convinced the universe it didn't exist. The difference was profound and it was entirely human. Keth stealth doctrine, like every other spacefaring civilization Yael had studied, approached concealment as a problem of signal reduction. Make your thermal bloom smaller. Make your gravitational shadow lighter. Make your electromagnetic emission quieter. It was the logical approach. It was the approach any species with a physics education would develop. Humans had developed it too. And then, because humans had a particular kind of engineering culture that treated every solution as the beginning of a better problem, someone at the Fleet Reconnaissance Bureau had asked the question that changed everything. What if instead of being quieter, we were indistinguishable from background noise asterisk? Asterisk. Not less visible. Not invisible. Genuinely, mathematically, statistically identical to the thermal and gravitational background of the space we were moving through. It had taken 22 years and 6 dead prototypes to make it work. The Lazarus's hull ran cold, not cold like a ship with its reactor suppressed, but cold like a rock. Like a fragment of nickel iron that had been drifting in this particular region of space long enough to reach thermal equilibrium with the local radiation environment. The hull itself was a metamaterial composite that didn't just absorb sensor emissions, it re-emitted them in the precise spectral profile of the background. The gravitational signature was managed through an internal mass redistribution system that kept the ship's center of gravity shifting on a randomized cycle, preventing the clean, stable shadow that even a small vessel would cast against the grid's lensing arrays. It wasn't perfect. It never had been. There was a residual thermal signature, small but real. A cold spot rather than a hot one, which the Keth grid wasn't calibrated to hunt for, because who would make themselves cold? Humans would. Humans did. Yael finished her protein bar and checked the navigation plot. 6 hours to the station. She pulled up the mission brief and read the objective for what felt like the 100th time. Ardennes Station was the logistics hub for the entire Keth Fourth Fleet. Fuel depot, ammunition storage, dry dock facilities for 300 vessels. If the war went the direction Command thought it was going, that station would be the staging point for an offensive that would cut off the Aldebaran colonies. Yael wasn't here to destroy it. She was here to find out exactly when. She was here because 11 months ago, a Keth courier had been intercepted near the Procyon relay, and in its data core, beneath 17 layers of encryption that had taken fleet intelligence 4 months to crack, there had been a single sentence in Keth military notation that, when translated, meant approximately, the route through Ardennes will be opened by the season of second rains. The Keth had seasons. Their homeworld had seasons. They organized their military calendar around them. Fleet intelligence needed to know what second rains corresponded to in standard time. They needed access to a Keth military time reference archive. And the only archive they'd been able to locate that wasn't behind a full naval installation's worth of defenses was inside Ardennes Station's logistics coordination node. So they'd sent Yael. She checked the display one more time, verified that the patrol rotation was on schedule, and went to wake her crew. 6 hours. That was enough time. Probably. There is a particular kind of dread that experienced military commanders know, not the sharp panic of sudden crisis, but the slow cold realization that something has been happening without your knowledge, and has been happening long enough that the window for simple solutions has quietly closed. Sesarath felt it settle into his chest like ballast as Vinthal walked him through the backtrack analysis. The contact first appears, or rather the absence first becomes mathematically detectable, here. The display showed the outer edge of the sensor grid, near Relay Station 9. Entry vector suggests it came in from the Procyon side, using the gravitational shadow of the debris field from the Ardennes 7 mining accident to mask its approach to the outer envelope. The debris field has been there for 11 years, Sesarath said. Yes, sir. Something was patient enough to use it. Patient. That was the word that bothered him. Keth military doctrine valued speed, decisiveness, the aggressive exploitation of advantage. Their enemies, historically before the humans before the Concord Wars, had operated on similar principles. The galaxy's spacefaring civilizations had evolved toward fast, powerful, direct. The physics of space combat rewarded it. Humans were not fast. Not in the ways that mattered to Keth doctrine. They were something else entirely. Sesarath had read the intelligence reports from the Concord front. He had read them carefully, the way a surgeon reads a pathology report, looking for the detail that changes the diagnosis. The reports described human vessels that fought at close range when every tactical model said they should fight at long range. Human commanders who retreated when every strategic model said they should press advantage, then returned at angles that shouldn't have been viable. Human logistics networks that somehow kept operating after the supply lines they should have depended on were severed. The reports, collectively, described a species that was very good at appearing to be somewhere it wasn't, or appearing not to be somewhere it was. He looked at the cold spot on his display. A vessel. Inside his lines. That he could not classify, could not properly see, and could not intercept before it reached the station. What's the confidence interval on our trajectory prediction? He asked. 93% that it's heading for the station itself, Vinthal said. The remaining 7% is distributed between the fuel depot and the dry dock. All three are within a half-degree arc. So whatever it is, it came here specifically. Yes, sir. And it came here knowing it could reach the station. Pause. The entry vector, the use of the debris shadow, the velocity profile. Yes, sir. This was not an accident or an exploratory probe. This was a planned insertion. They knew about the grid. Seseroth pulled up the station schematics on a secondary display. Ardennes Station was not a combat installation. It was logistics, which meant its defensive systems were calibrated for threat response after identification, not preemptive engagement. You couldn't shoot at what you hadn't identified. You couldn't intercept what you couldn't track reliably. Which meant whatever was inside his lines had chosen its target carefully. "Get me Admiral Rethson on the priority channel," he said, "and begin evacuation protocols for the coordination node. Archives, communication systems, anything in the logistics core, I want it offline or physically moved to secondary storage within 2 hours. If we begin evacuation protocols, it will be visible to any sensor package watching the station," Vinthal said carefully. "They'll know we've detected them." "They'll know we've detected something," Seseroth said. "Which changes their calculus. If this is an intelligence operation, and I believe it is, they will be forced to choose between accelerating their timeline and accepting reduced collection, or maintaining their approach and risking empty archives." He turned back to the display. The cold spot was still there. Still moving. "We cannot stop them from reaching the station," he said quietly. "Not in time. So we change what they find when they get here." Aboard the Lazarus, Specialist Tomas Reyes was the first to notice. Reyes ran signals intelligence. SIGINT in the crew's shorthand, from a station that was generously described the size of a large closet. He had 17 active collection feeds running across every frequency band the Keth used for station coordination, patrol communication and logistics management. He had been watching those feeds for 40 hours without anything more interesting than routine traffic. At hour 41 the traffic changed. Not volume. Volume stayed exactly the same. A sudden spike would have told him something obvious. The change was subtler, a shift in the content of the traffic. Logistics coordination messages where the timing didn't match standard scheduling windows. A maintenance request filed through a channel normally reserved for emergency operations. A fuel allocation query answered faster than standard processing time. It wasn't the words. It was the rhythm. "Commander." He kept his voice level. "They know we're here." Yael was at his shoulder in 4 seconds. She looked at his feeds. She read the rhythm the same way he had. "They can't know precisely," she said. "Or they'd be broadcasting intercept vectors." "No," Reyes agreed. "They know something is here. And they're moving things." Yael straightened. "What things?" "The coordination node. I'm reading a data architecture shutdown sequence. They're taking the logistics archive offline." The room, small as it was, went very quiet. Yael had 6 hours to reach a station that was, right now, in the process of hiding the exact thing she'd come 40 light years to find. She looked at her crew. 8 faces in the dim blue light of the operations compartment, waiting. "Options," she said. Senior Technician Adissa Okafor spoke first. He was the Lazarus' systems intrusion specialist, and his expression was the focused calm of a man rearranging a problem. "If they're taking the archive offline, they're moving it to secondary storage. Secondary storage on a logistics station this size will be a hardened physical location, not networked but physically accessible. Which means instead of a remote collection operation," Yael said, following the logic, "we're talking about a physical penetration." "Which was never part of the mission profile," said Lieutenant Commander Priya Singh, who was responsible, technically, for the opinion that the crew's safety was worth considering. "No," Yael said. "It wasn't." She looked at the tactical display. The station was still 6 hours away. The archive was going offline in 2. She did the math that the mission brief had never asked her to do, because no one in fleet intelligence had thought this would become necessary. Then she made the decision that would eventually become a case study at the Fleet Reconnaissance Academy, filed under the heading, "Adaptation Under Constraint," when the target changes shape. "We're not collecting anymore," she said. "We're going in. There is a gap between bold and reckless, and it is not always wide." Yael Dehan had spent 11 years in fleet reconnaissance learning to measure that gap precisely, because in her line of work, the wrong measurement meant a ship that didn't come home. She stood in the Lazarus's cramped mission planning bay, 8 crew members around a table designed for 6, and laid out the problem with the particular bluntness she reserved for situations where soft language would get people killed. The original mission was remote SIGINT collection. We park at distance, we listen to the logistics archives operational traffic, we find the reference data we need, we leave. Clean, no contact, no exposure. That mission is over. She tapped the display. They're taking the archive offline and moving it to physical storage. Which means our only remaining option for obtaining the information command needs is to go inside the station and get it. The silence that followed had texture. She could feel her crew calculating the same ratios she had, mission necessity against probability of return. Station complement? Asked Lieutenant Hemi Walker, who ran tactical planning. Logistics station, not a combat installation. Fleet intelligence puts the garrison at approximately 400 Keth security personnel, plus 1,200 civilian logistics workers. The garrison is equipped for threat response, weapons, armor, internal sensor grids, but their doctrine is reactive, not proactive. They're designed to respond to a threat that's been identified and located, not hunt for one they can't find. Which is what we've been for the last 41 hours, Walker said. Which is what we'll need to keep being. Yael pulled up the station schematics. Not complete, no human had complete schematics for Ardennes Station, but the partial picture built from years of signals intercepts and 3 previous reconnaissance passes by other Lazarus-class vessels. Secondary storage on this class of Keth logistics station is standardized. The Keth are excellent engineers and they do not reinvent solutions that work. The physical archive will be in one of 2 locations, the command core on level 7, or the emergency coordination bunker on level 3. You said the archive is going offline in 2 hours, said Okafor. But transit time to the station is 6. Yes. Yael let the math sit in the room. By the time we dock, the archive will have been in physical storage for 4 hours. That actually works in our favor. A freshly moved archive is still being organized. The access protocols won't have been fully hardened yet. The staff moving it will be focused on the move itself, not on security posture. And we dock how? Asked Singh, whose job it remained to ask the question no one wanted to. Yael had spent 2 of the last 6 hours on this specific problem. Ardennes Station receives approximately 40 to 60 logistics vessels per week. Freighters, fuel tenders, parts haulers. The docking management system processes them semi-autonomously. The volume is too high for manual review of every contact. The Lazarus can generate a transponder package that reads as a registered Keth logistics tender. Not perfectly, a detailed inspection would see through it, but enough to pass automated docking authorization during the brief window when the station systems will be partially disrupted by the archive migration. You want to use their own logistics chaos to walk in the front door, Walker said. I want to use their predictable, standardized, documented engineering to predict exactly when their front door will be unlocked and walk through it. She looked around the table. No one spoke. I'm not going to tell you this is a safe operation, she said. It isn't. The original mission was safe. This mission is not. If anyone has a serious tactical objection, not a fear, not a preference, a genuine tactical problem I haven't accounted for, say it now. Adissa Okafor raised one finger. The team going inside. How many? 3. Me, you, and Walker. The rest of the crew holds position aboard the ship and maintains our exit option. And if the exit option becomes untenable? Yael met his eyes. Then you leave without us and complete the mission by reporting what you know, and command adjusts from there. Okafor nodded slowly. He didn't look happy. He looked like a man who had just been told a truth he would have preferred to hear differently, and was respecting it anyway. One more thing, said Petty Officer Rena Cho from the back of the room. She was the youngest member of the crew and rarely spoke in planning sessions. Everyone turned. The Keth commander, whoever detected us, he moved the archive because he thought it would stop us. He's not wrong about the obstacle he created. But he doesn't know what we're going to do about it. She paused. He's going to be watching for us to try to collect remotely. Or to abort. He's not going to be watching for us to physically board the station. The room was quiet again, but differently this time. That's exactly right, Yael said. He made the correct move for the threat he thinks he's facing. We're going to be a different threat. Sesaroth received Admiral Rethsan's response 40 minutes after his initial communication. The Admiral's message was brief in the way that only very senior commanders could be brief without appearing dismissive. The brevity of someone who trusted the receiver to fill in the implications. Archive relocation confirmed. Station defense posture elevated to level 2. We are sending the 7th Intercept Wing. Estimated arrival, 9 hours. Hold what you have, Commander. Do not let them collect. 9 hours. The intercept wing would arrive 3 hours after the unidentified vessel reached the station. Sesaroth read the message twice. He appreciated the Admiral's confidence. He found it, at this particular moment, only partially useful. The intercept wing would cut off the vessel's escape route. It would ensure that whatever had entered the threshold did not leave with whatever it had come to find. Those were valuable outcomes. But they depended on one assumption: that the vessel would behave as an intelligence collection platform. That it would maintain distance, attempt passive collection, and when collection became impossible, attempt to leave. Seseroth stood at his display and looked at the cold spot that had been inside his grid for 42 hours. He thought about a species that had designed a vessel around the principle of looking like background radiation. He thought about the mining debris shadow. He thought about 41 hours of patience. He thought, what would I do if I were them and I had just discovered that my target was changing shape? He didn't have the answer. That was what worried him. He opened a second channel and began composing a message to the station's garrison commander. Not about the archive. About the docking management system. He didn't have the answer. But he had a suspicion, and suspicions properly acted on were sometimes enough. The transponder package that Specialist Reyes built in 2 hours and 40 minutes was, by any fair technical assessment, a masterpiece of fraudulent engineering. It wasn't a simple signal spoof. Signal spoofing was detectable by any reasonably current Keth docking system because the Keth, following several incidents involving exactly that technique during the early Concorde skirmishes, had added authentication layers that verified not just the signal but its history. A registered vessel had a transaction record, a maintenance log, a pattern of prior dockings that a freshly generated signal couldn't replicate. What Reyes built was different. He had spent 8 months before this deployment building a library of genuine Keth logistics traffic patterns from intercepts and archived signals. He had a database of actual registered vessels, their transponder signatures, their maintenance cycles, their docking histories. Not complete profiles. You couldn't get complete profiles through signals collection. But enough. The vessel he chose was the Corvintala, a registered fuel tender that operated on the Ardennes-Procyon route. The Corvintala had docked at Ardennes Station 11 times in the past 2 years. It was, according to the maintenance records Reyes had assembled from intercepted logistics traffic, currently overdue for a scheduled resupply run that had been delayed by a routing dispute. The Lazarus would not pretend to be a ship it wasn't. It would pretend to be a ship that was late, arriving during a period of partial system disruption, carrying ordinary cargo no one was urgently waiting for. The best disguises weren't dramatic. They were boring. Authentication window is 8 minutes long, Reyes reported, voice flat with concentration. The archive migration will have the station's logistics management processor running at reduced bandwidth from hour 4 through hour 6 of the relocation process. We hit the docking request inside that window and the system's automated prioritization will flag us as low urgency, route us to secondary dock 7, and process us with minimal human review. Secondary dock 7 is on the outer ring, Walker noted, studying the partial station schematic. Level access to the interior service corridors. 80 meters from the Level 3 emergency coordination bunker, Okafor confirmed. He had the station layout memorized. He'd had it memorized for 3 days since the mission brief because Okafor memorized things the way some people breathed, automatically, and because stopping would be dangerous. 40 meters from the Level 7 Command Core Service access point. Yael checked the timer. We'll be inside the authentication window in 11 minutes. Everyone who's going suit up. Adissa, final check on the intrusion package. The 3 of them moved through the ship with the efficiency of a crew that had rehearsed this. Not this specific scenario, but the physical and mental discipline of preparation. Yael pulled on the compression suit that would let her pass for Keth physiognomy in a glance. Not a perfect disguise, the Keth were taller and their facial structure was unmistakably different. But Ardennes Station had a non-Keth contractor population of several dozen who moved through the same service corridors. In work suits, at distance, in the dim light of a logistics station's maintenance areas, human and non-Keth contractor were close enough. Close enough was what they were working with today. Walker gave her a look as she clipped her tool harness on, the look he'd been giving her since the planning session. Not doubt. Assessment. You know there's a version of this where the commander who moved the archive already thought of the docking angle, he said quietly. I know. And that doesn't change the call. It changes how careful we are inside. She checked the harness buckle, met his eyes. He's smart, Walker. He moved the archive before we could collect. That's good instinct under pressure. Smart people sometimes think of everything. Smart people also sometimes think of everything in sequence and we move faster than sequence. Walker nodded once and said nothing else. That was what she valued about him. He argued until the argument was done and then he stopped. The docking request transmitted at hour 4, minute 17 of the archive migration window. On Ardennes Station's logistics management processor, running at 63% capacity due to the migration's bandwidth demand, the Corvintala's authentication package was processed in 41 seconds. The overdue status of the vessel's resupply run added a minor priority flag that actually moved the processing forward. The system routed the contact to secondary dock 7, assigned a berth, and generated a standard arrival notification. The notification sat in the logistics queue for 6 minutes before a human operator reviewed it. The operator was a Keth civilian logistics coordinator named Fenaris, who was 40 minutes into a 12-hour shift and had been dealing with the disruptions from the archive migration for most of those 40 minutes. She looked at the Corvintala notification, checked the overdue flag, looked at the berth assignment, and routed a standard welcome confirmation. She did not flag it for security review. Security review was for unknown contacts. The Corvintala was known. In the operations center, Vinthal was watching his sensor display when the docking request processed. He saw the Corvintala registration. He checked the authentication. He checked the arrival vector. He stared at the arrival vector for 7 seconds. Then he said very quietly, "Commander, I need you to see this." Sesaroth was across the deck in 6 steps. The Corvintala's arrival vector was consistent with an approach from the Procyon relay. It was also, when overlaid with the track of the cold spot anomaly, suspiciously convergent. "The real Corvintala," Vinthal said. "Where is it?" Sesaroth was already moving toward the communication station. "Find out." The query to the Procyon relay took 4 minutes to return. The answer was 11 words in Keth logistics notation that translated cleanly. Corvintala currently docked at Procyon Station. Departure scheduled next cycle. The Corvintala was not arriving at Ardennes Station. Something else was. "Garrison commander," Sesaroth said. "Get me the garrison commander. Now." He realized, no longer thinking about the archive. He was thinking about what happened to a station when something that had been invisible for 43 hours decided to become visible on its own terms, at a time of its own choosing. He was thinking about how much damage 3 humans could do inside a logistics station before they were found. And he was thinking, with a cold clarity that had nothing to do with his sensor display's thermal readings, that the vessel outside hadn't come here to destroy anything. It had come here to read. The question was what it would be willing to do when the reading became difficult. End of Part 4. Secondary Dock 7 smelled like machine oil and recycled atmosphere and the particular metallic bite of Keth environmental systems running their CO2 scrubbers slightly warm. A detail Yao filed away automatically, the way she filed all details, in the operational background of her mind where they sat until they became useful. They were through the airlock in 40 seconds. Walker on point. Okafor with the intrusion package. A device slightly larger than a hardback book that contained, in its dense electronics, the tools to interface with Keth's secondary storage architecture. Yael in the middle, watching angles. The dock was standard Keth logistics design. High ceilings, wide corridors sized for cargo movement, lighting calibrated to the Keth visual range which ran slightly warm compared to human preference. Other than a single cargo loader running an automated pallet cycle at the far end, the dock was empty. Second shift, non-peak hours. The migration disruption had pulled most available station personnel toward the archive relocation effort. They moved through the dock and into the service corridor access point without contact. "Checkpoint," Walker murmured. Yael checked the schematic on her wrist display. The service corridor to level 3 ran through a maintenance checkpoint, not a security post, a maintenance checkpoint, designed to track contractor movement for work order accounting. It logged badges. They didn't have badges. But maintenance checkpoints on Keth logistics stations, per Fleet Intelligence's detailed documentation of the type, ran their badge logging through the station's main logistics management processor, which was currently running at 63% capacity. "Okafor," Yael said. He was already on it. 20 seconds with a physical interface port on the checkpoint terminal. "Logging is queued but not actively processing," he said. "We'll register as unassigned contractor entries. System will flag for follow-up at the end of the shift cycle." "How long is the shift cycle?" 4 hours 11 minutes from now. 4 hours. Longer than they needed if everything went correctly. They went through the checkpoint. The Level 3 emergency coordination bunker was built for exactly the scenario its name described. A physical hardened space where station command functions could relocate if the main command core was compromised. It was not regularly staffed. It was checked weekly, powered on daily for systems verification, and otherwise sat dark and quiet behind a heavy pressure door that required both a physical key, an actual mechanical key. The Keth trusted certain things to physics rather than electronics, and a command authorization code. Okafor stood at the bunker door and looked at it with the expression of a man encountering an interesting problem. The physical key is a non-standard cut, he said. I don't have a blank that matches the Ardennes station specification. What about the authorization code? Walker asked. Authorization code interface is offline because the door power is routed through the archive migration's auxiliary power draw. He paused. The door is currently operating on its mechanical backup, which means the authorization code system isn't functioning. Which means the door is purely mechanical right now. Yao looked at the door. You're saying the additional security system that was supposed to make this harder has accidentally made it easier. I'm saying the door lock is a single-factor mechanical system right now, yes. Yao looked at Walker. Walker looked at the door. He reached into his tool harness and removed a slim case. Inside the case were 7 tension wrenches and 9 picks designed specifically for Keth mechanical lock profiles, which Fleet Reconnaissance had begun documenting 4 years ago because someone, somewhere, had predicted that this exact scenario, digital security down, mechanical lock as last resort, would eventually happen. It took Walker 4 minutes and 30 seconds. The door opened. The archive was inside. 40 storage cores on a portable rack, freshly moved, still warm from the relocation process. And beside the rack, sitting on a folding chair with a data terminal in his lap, was a Keth technician who had apparently drawn the short assignment of sitting with the archive until permanent storage was established. He looked up at 3 humans entering a supposedly locked bunker. For a moment no one moved. Yael spoke first, in Keth. Not fluent but functional, the level that 6 months of intensive language preparation bought you. We're not here to harm anyone. We need access to the temporal reference archive. 10 minutes. Then we leave. The technician stared at her. You're human, he said. Yes. You came through the docking system. Corvin Tala. He was faster than she'd expected. Yes. The commander figured out the Corvin Tala was a fake. He's already sent Garrison to the docks. He paused. You have less than 10 minutes. Yael held the technician's gaze. She was reading him the way 11 years of field work had taught her to read people. Not their words, their weight. The way they sat. The micro-expressions that crossed a face when a person was deciding something. He was deciding something. The temporal reference archive, she said. Where is it on the rack? The technician looked at her for another 3 seconds. Then he pointed to the second shelf, 4th core from the left. That one, he said. And you should know, the commander, Sesarath, he's a good officer. What he did to protect this station, moving the archive, trying to flush you out, that was correct procedure. He was right about almost everything. Almost? Yael said as Okafor moved to the core. He assumed that an intelligence vessel that lost its ability to collect remotely would abort the mission. The technician looked at her steadily. He was wrong about that. Okafor had the core interface connected. His fingers moved across the intrusion package. I'm in. Copying temporal reference tables now. 4 minutes. 4 minutes. Yael stood in a locked bunker inside the most fortified logistics installation in the Keth 4th Fleet's operational theater, talking to a Keth technician who had just helped her, and she was trying to understand why. Why? She asked. The technician set down his data terminal. Because the war will end, he said simply. It always ends. And when it does, someone will have to explain to both sides exactly what happened and when. The temporal record should be accurate. He paused. Your kind fights like you intend to survive the ending. I find that relevant. Okafor said, done. They left the same way they came. The technician sat with his archive and said nothing. Garrison Squad 7 Alpha reached secondary dock 7 4 minutes and 50 seconds after Sesaratha's order. They found the dock empty, the Lazarus's borrowed berth vacant, and a docking seal that had been closed from the inside with a manual override that had then been carefully reset to look like a normal departure. Whoever had been there was gone. The pursuit order went out to every patrol wing within response range. The cold spot signature, the one Vinthal had been watching for over 40 hours, was exactly where it should not have been, departing through the station's own traffic management system as a registered tender completing a resupply run. Ordinary. Routine. Boring. The Lazarus was 300 kilometers from Ardennes Station before the first intercept vector was calculated. Aboard the Lazarus, the conversation in the operations compartment was brief, focused, and conducted entirely in the shorthand of people who trusted each other's competence enough to skip the emotional margin. Pursuit wings, said Singh, who had managed the ship while the 3 of them were aboard the station. 2 confirmed. Possibly a third vector from the direction of the outer grid. They know what we are now, Walker said. He was stripping out of his compression suit with the methodical efficiency of someone who kept his hands busy while his mind worked. Corvantala cover is blown. They'll have distributed the actual contact profile. Not entirely, Reyes said from his station. They know we used the Corvantala transponder. They know we docked. They know we departed. They don't know what we look like on sensors. He turned in his chair. We're still the cold spot. The intercept wings are tracking projected courses from our docking location. They're hunting a shape they can't see. Yael stood at the navigation display. 2 pursuit wings, each with a projected intercept vector. A third possible vector that might be a wing or might be a patrol rotation that had been repositioned. The outer grid, the one she'd slipped through 43 hours ago, was behind her, and it was not going to let her slip through again the same way. Debris field, she said. We came through it, Singh said. They'll have it covered. We came through it passively. We rode thermal equilibrium the whole way in. Yael traced the projection on the display. Going out, we need to be faster. We can't afford 40 hours. If we run hot, we're visible, Walker said. We're going to be visible regardless, eventually. The question is whether we're visible in a way they can intercept. She looked at Reyes. What's the patrol density in the outer grid right now? Higher than when we came in. They've tightened the rotation. He pulled up the sensor data. But they tightened it around the most probable exit vectors. Standard doctrine, seal the routes that doctrine says a fleeing vessel would use. We're not a standard vessel, Yael said. Show me the gaps. Reyes worked for 60 seconds. There. He highlighted a section of the grid near the edge of the debris field, not the shadow they'd used to enter, but a different angle, one that would require threading between 2 relay stations with less than 40,000 kilometers of clearance. The patrol sweep there is every 40 minutes. Clean window of about 9 minutes if we're inside the threshold before the sweep starts. 9 minutes to cross 40,000 kilometers of monitored space, Walker said. We don't need to cross it, Yael said. We need to enter it and then drift. If we cross into that corridor at the right velocity and then kill the drive entirely, we become debris, Okafor said. He was looking at her with the expression he got when a problem clicked into a shape he recognized. We become part of the field. They're looking for a moving cold spot. A stationary cold spot in a debris field is a rock. Until the next sweep finds us and we're in the wrong place for a rock, Singh said. Then we move during the sweep blind spots and stop before the next one. Yael looked around the compartment. It's not elegant. It's insane, Singh said pleasantly. It will work, Reyes said. The timing is tight but it works. I can run the projection. Run it. He ran it. The projection worked. The margins were, by any reasonable standard, terrifying. But they were positive margins, and in fleet reconnaissance positive margins were what you built a mission around. Sesaroth watched the pursuit wing sensor reports come in and felt, in the data, the shape of something he was not going to catch. Not because they were faster. Because they were different. The pursuit wings were hunting a vessel using doctrine designed for vessels that behaved like vessels. The thing he was hunting behaved like debris, like background noise, like an absence where a presence should have been. It didn't fight doctrine. It existed in the spaces doctrine didn't cover. He watched for 40 minutes. He watched for 90. He watched while the intercept windows opened and closed without contact, while the patrol sweeps found nothing, while the cold spot that had been inside his lines for 43 hours simply wasn't there anymore. At some point it was outside his grid. He didn't know when. He didn't know how. He knew the direction. The debris field angle was the only exit that made geometric sense, but he didn't know the method, and the method was what would matter when his report went to the admiral. He filed his report carefully. He described everything he knew and, unusual for a Keth military report which conventionally omitted tactical failure analysis from initial communications, he described what he didn't know. He described the cold spot. He described the patience. He described the technician's statement, which he had obtained in debrief, about the humans fighting like they intended to survive the ending. And at the end of the report, in the section reserved for commander's assessment, he wrote something that his staff found unusual and his admiral found deeply uncomfortable. Recommend immediate review of grid sensor doctrine to include cold signature detection parameters. The human reconnaissance methodology represents a fundamental approach to concealment that our current detection architecture was not designed to find. We did not fail to stop them because our grid was weak. We failed because our grid was built to hunt something they chose not to be. He sent the report. Then he went back to his display and looked at the empty space where the cold spot had been. He thought about 9 minutes of window and 40,000 kilometers of debris. He thought about what kind of calculation went into threading that needle. He thought they did not feel invincible. They felt cornered. And a cornered species that responds to corners by doing things no doctrine predicted. That was something entirely different from an enemy. That was something that required a new category of concern. The Lazarus cleared the Keth sensor grid's outer envelope 11 hours and 14 minutes after Yael had told her crew they were going in. Nobody cheered. It wasn't that kind of crew, and it wasn't that kind of moment. The kind of moment it was, the quiet, bone-deep one, was the moment after the last relay station fell behind them and Reyes said, "We're clear," and everyone in the operations compartment exhaled at precisely the same time without having planned to. Yael sat in the command chair and looked at the star field on the forward display and let herself feel, for exactly 30 seconds, the weight of what had almost happened several times in the last 11 hours. Then she let it go. That was the other thing 11 years taught you. The feeling was real, it was valid, it was necessary, and it had to be processed and released before it became the kind of thing that made you careful in the wrong direction next time. "Status," she said. "All systems nominal," Singh reported. "We've got a drive efficiency issue from the heat cycling during the debris field transit. I'd say 50% probability of needing a repair stop before we reach the relay at Procyon. Nothing that compromises the mission." "The data core?" Yael asked. Okafor held it up. A standard Keth storage module, slightly warm, containing the temporal reference tables that Fleet Intelligence had sent them 40 light-years to find. Intact. Full copy. Authentication markers matched the archive classification protocols. He paused. "We got what we came for." Yael nodded. She looked around the compartment. 8 people who had done their jobs with a precision and a calm that she would put in her report in the most exact language she could find, because exact language was what careers deserved when careers had been earned this way. "Reyes," she said. "Commander? Begin the mission data package. Full documentation, entry profile, grid analysis, the transponder package architecture, the bunker penetration, the debris field exit. All of it." He raised an eyebrow. "The full package is going to make a lot of officers in Fleet Intelligence very uncomfortable. The part where we had to improvise the entire second half of the mission because our target changed?" "The full package," Yael repeated. "Because the next crew that comes through a grid like this needs to know that the target changes shape. And they need to know that changing shape with it is an option." She looked at the star field. "That's what we carry home. Not just the data core. The documentation of how." The temporal reference tables from the Ardennes Station archive were delivered to Fleet Intelligence Command 11 days after the Lazarus cleared the Keth grid. The analysis took 6 more days. The result was a 16-page document with a simple conclusion. Second reigns in the Keth military calendar corresponded to a window beginning 41 days from the date of the intercepted courier's transmission. The Keth Fourth Fleet's offensive through Ardennes was not a future contingency. It was a scheduled operation, already in its logistical preparation phase, designed to strike the Aldebaran colonies before the defensive infrastructure there could be completed. The window was narrow. Fleet Command moved forces into the Aldebaran corridor within 72 hours of receiving the analysis. The defensive infrastructure was completed in 31 days. When the Keth Fourth Fleet arrived at the Ardennes threshold to begin their offensive push, they found a prepared defense where they had expected an exposed flank. The battle that followed was hard. It was not won easily or without cost. But it was won, and the margin, according to the post-action analysis, was exactly the kind of margin that intelligence provides. Not a certainty but a preparation. Not a guaranteed outcome, but the difference between fighting from knowledge and fighting from surprise. The analysis document noted, in a section on intelligence sourcing, that the data had been obtained through a single-vessel reconnaissance operation that had penetrated the Keth Fourth Fleet's primary logistics sector. It did not describe how. That was in a separate document, classification level above the battle analysis, read by a much smaller group of people who needed to understand not what had been accomplished but how it had been done and, more importantly, how it could be done again. In that document, in a section labeled Field Commander's Assessment, Yael Dehan wrote 9 pages. The first 8 covered technical doctrine, sensor profile management, transponder architecture, physical penetration methodology, debris field transit technique. The 9th page was shorter. It was also, she knew, the one that would be read most carefully. The Keth commander at Ardennes, Sesaroth, was competent. His detection of the cold signature anomaly, while delayed, was the result of careful methodology, not luck. His decision to relocate the archive was the correct response to the threat he believed he was facing. His communication to his garrison about the docking system was also correct and almost intercepted us. He failed not because he was wrong but because he was solving a different problem than the one we were presenting. He was thinking about an intelligence vessel that, when its remote collection option closed, would either adapt remotely or leave. He was not thinking about an intelligence vessel that would adapt by becoming a different kind of threat entirely. This is the consistent pattern in human Keth tactical engagements that I have observed across 7 years of field operations. The Keth are excellent at solving the problem in front of them. They are less excellent at accounting for the possibility that the problem will become something else while they are solving it. We are not better engineers. We are not more courageous. We are not physiologically superior. We are a species that, when cornered, asks, "What else can this be?" before we ask, "How do we escape?" That question, asked fast enough, executed cleanly enough, is a weapon that no sensor grid is designed to detect. Recommendation: continued development of Lazarus-class operational doctrine. The grid at Ardennes is being revised. The next grid will be better. We should assume every grid will be better and build our doctrine accordingly, not around any specific technique, but around the principle that technique is always temporary and adaptation is always necessary. We got the data. We came home. Both of those outcomes matter. Neither should be assumed for the next crew. She filed the document. Then she went to the Lazarus's small galley, made herself coffee with the particular focused attention she gave to things that deserved attention, and drank it looking at the star field outside the porthole. Somewhere behind them, 40 light-years back, a Keth commander was filing his own reports, was revising his own doctrine, was thinking about cold spots and patience and a species that walked into a locked room and came out with what they'd gone in for. She hoped he was writing it down accurately. She hoped someone on his side was reading it carefully. Because the war would end. It always ended. And when it did, the understanding built in documents like these, the documentation of what humans and Keth had learned about each other in the hard grammar of conflict, that understanding would be the foundation of whatever came next. She finished her coffee. She went back to work.